The dense forest closed in around Sarah as she drove down the narrow, winding road. Tall pine trees crowded so close their branches scraped the sides of her car, casting deep shadows even in the late afternoon light. She had been driving for over an hour on this isolated route, with no signs of civilization, only the occasional dirt track branching off into the wilderness. According to her map, the town should be just over the next hill. Sarah was growing uneasy the further she ventured from any other trace of humanity. The dense woods seemed to swallow up the road, giving the impression of being slowly swallowed whole the deeper in she went. Finally, as she crested a steep incline, Sarah spotted signs of life in the distant valley below. Nestled amongst the surrounding forest was a small cluster of buildings, smoke wisping from chimneys. She breathed a sigh of relief to see the town come into view. Though an ominous stillness hung over the scene, no movement stirred on the empty streets as she drove down into the center. Parking in front of the general store, Sarah stepped out of the car and took in her surroundings. The town appeared frozen in time, with weathered wooden structures and dirt roads that had not changed in decades. An air of melancholy pervaded the lonely scene. As she gathered her bag and notebook, Sarah noticed a lone figure watching her from the porch of a nearby home. An elderly woman regarded her with wary eyes, not making any move to greet the stranger in their midst. Sarah offered a polite smile, which was not returned before the woman turned and disappeared back into her house, closing the door firmly behind her. It seemed she would find no welcome here, but Sarah was not one to be deterred, especially now that her curiosity was piqued by the locals' standoffish behavior. She had come to this remote town, seeking answers about the string of unexplained disappearances that had occurred without resolution over the past few years. If the people here knew something and were unwilling to share, she would have to dig deeper to uncover the truth herself. Her first stop was the small police station, hoping to get insight from the local authorities. But when she introduced herself and her reason for visiting, the loan officer grew visibly uncomfortable. "I'm afraid there's not much I can tell you, miss," he said evasively. "Those cases are still ongoing investigations. Now, if you'll excuse me." He made a hasty retreat back into his office without another word. Clearly, she would find no help from that quarter either. Her next step was the local diner, hoping to glean more information over a hot meal from the other residents. As she entered, the lively chatter died off into an ominous silence. All eyes turned to stare at the stranger in their midst, with thinly veiled hostility and fear. It seemed this town held many secrets, and its people were not willing to share them. But Sarah was determined to uncover the truth behind these disappearances, no matter the resistance she faced. Something sinister lurked in these woods, and she would not rest until she found out what or who was preying upon this community. Her search was only just beginning. That night, as Sarah tried to sleep in her cramped motel room, strange noises woke her from fitful dreams. At first, she thought it was only the wind howling through the trees outside. But then she heard it, faint whispers, carried on the air, just at the edge of hearing. She strained to make out the words, but they remained unintelligible, more of a haunting murmur than clear speech. Goosebumps rose on her skin as Sarah listened, unnerved by the unearthly quality to the sounds. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the very walls were whispering. Throwing back the covers, she got up and searched the room but found nothing amiss. The noises faded away, leaving only an ominous silence in their wake. Sarah knew she was being foolish, putting too much stock in idle sounds that were easily explained by the isolation of her surroundings. Yet she could not shake an unsettled feeling as she tried to return to sleep. Her dreams were plagued by shadowy figures, and that same whispering, as if something was trying to contact her from beyond. Come morning, she was glad to leave the confines of the motel behind in search of answers. According to her research, the one person most likely to provide insight was a reclusive man named Mr. Hawthorne, rumored to have lived in these woods his entire life. His ramshackle homestead sat on the very edge of town, surrounded by a tangle of overgrown vegetation. Sarah knocked at the weathered front door for several minutes before it creaked open, a sliver, revealing a wary face, peering out. "What do you want?" the man asked gruffly. She introduced herself and her reason for coming, hoping to gain his trust. For a long moment, he said nothing, regarding her with a calculating stare that made her feel exposed. Finally, he grunted and opened the door wider to admit her inside. The single room was cluttered with books and artifacts, the air musty with the scent of old paper. Mr. Hawthorne gestured for her to sit at the scarred wooden table as he lowered himself into a chair across from her, every movement slow and deliberate. "I know why you're here," he said without preamble. "You want to know about the mill." Sarah leaned forward eagerly. "Yes. Can you tell me anything about its history?" The disappearances seemed connected to that place somehow. A shadow passed over the old man's face. "There are some things better left buried in the past, where they belong. Mark my words, girl, if you value your life, you'll leave this town be and forget what you came here seeking." "I can't do that," she insisted. "People are in danger. Please, if you know anything at all that could help shed light on what's really happening." Mr. Hawthorne sighed heavily. "You won't be dissuaded. I see that now. Very well. I'll tell you what I can. But you must promise to heed my warnings, for there are dark forces at work in those woods that no mortal should trifle with." He launched into a long, rambling tale that sent a chill through Sarah as she took notes feverishly by candlelight. The old mill, it seemed, was built upon ancient sacred ground where the local native tribe had performed rituals and sacrifices long ago. But when the first European settlers arrived, they did not respect the power of that place. Greed and superstition led them to build over the sacred burial mounds, damming the river to power their lumber mill. From that point on, the land and its people were cursed. Strange illnesses, accidents, and madness plagued the town as an angry spirit lashed out against the desecration. Mr. Hawthorne spoke in hushed, fearful tones of the malevolent entity that still dwelled in the mill, feeding off the life force of any who dared enter its domain. For decades, it has haunted these woods, preying upon the townsfolk to sate its insatiable wrath, and it will not stop until the sins of the past have been answered for, he warned grimly. A chill ran down Sarah's spine at his ominous words. She tried to rationalize it away as superstitious nonsense, yet could not deny the air of authenticity in Mr. Hawthorne's tale. Something about this place did not feel right, and she was beginning to believe there were darker forces at work here than any logical explanation. As she left his homestead that evening, Sarah's mind raced with disturbing questions. If even a fraction of what the old man said held truth, then she had severely underestimated the true nature of the threat lurking in these woods. Glancing back at the looming tree line, for the first time, she felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck, sensing unseen eyes watching her retreat under the gathering dusk. Whatever entity dwelled within those trees, it seemed to have taken notice of the interloper in their midst, and Sarah feared she may have unwittingly made herself its next target. That night, Sarah's dreams were plagued by disturbing visions. She saw shadowy figures moving through the dense forest, their faces obscured by long hair or tattered cloaks that whipped around them in the wind. They seemed to be chanting or praying in unfamiliar language as they gathered around a great stone altar deep in the woods. On the altar was a struggling human form, bound and gagged. With a jolt, Sarah realized it was herself lying there, helpless to escape as the robed figures raised ancient blades to the night sky. She tried to scream, but no sound came, only that same whispering on the wind that grew louder and more frenzied. Just as the blades began to descend, Sarah woke with a start, gasping for breath in the suffocating motel room. The visions lingered at the edges of her mind all through the next day as she continued her investigation. Everywhere she went, the locals' hostility had grown more overt. Doors were slammed in her face, and questions met with stony silence. It seemed Mr. Hawthorne's warnings had spread, and the people here wanted nothing more than for her to leave them in peace. As evening fell, Sarah decided to risk venturing out to the mill under cover of darkness. Perhaps there she could find some clue the others were unwilling to provide. Arming herself with a flashlight, she trekked through the dense forest trail. The towering pines blocked out what little moonlight filtered through the clouds, plunging the path into an inky blackness. Every snapped twig or rustle of undergrowth made her jump, imagining unseen threats lurking in the shadows. By the time she spotted the hulking silhouette of the mill, up ahead through the trees, Sarah was on edge. As she drew nearer, the structure took on an even more ominous appearance. Weathered boards creaked and groaned in the wind, windows staring down like empty eye sockets. She shone her light around, picking out details. A rusted water wheel half sunk into mud, dilapidated outbuildings leaning at precarious angles. This place had an air of decay and abandonment, as if even wildlife dared not enter. Cautiously, Sarah made her way inside through a sagging doorway. The beam cut through swirling dust motes, picking out remnants of the mill's former function. Rusting machinery lay where it had been left to rot, floorboards sagging under her feet. As she explored further, something on the ground caught her eye. Bending down, Sarah brushed away debris to reveal a weathered stone etched with unfamiliar symbols. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the markings from her dreams. This was part of the altar from her vision, but how could that be possible? As she stared transfixed, a noise from the shadows made her whip around with a gasp. Two glowing orbs stared back at her from the darkness, and a low, unearthly moan echoed through the mill. Whatever was in there with her, it was not human. Terror gripped Sarah as the entity seemed to materialize before her eyes, taking on a hulking, shadowy form. She bolted for the exit, the thing in pursuit. Crashing through the undergrowth, she did not stop running until she collapsed in a trembling heap back at the motel, the mill's anguished wails still echoing in her mind. Whatever malevolent force dwelled in that cursed place, it had made itself known, and Sarah knew with chilling certainty that it would not rest until it had silenced her for good. In the days following her terrifying encounter at the mill, Sarah began experiencing disturbing new phenomena. Strange noises and whispers plagued her waking hours as well as her dreams, as if something was trying to make contact from beyond the veil. She found herself growing increasingly paranoid, jumping at every small sound. Even in daylight, the forest surrounding the town took on an ominous quality. Shadowy movement seemed to dart among the trees when she wasn't looking directly, and more than once, Sarah swore she glimpsed spectral figures watching from the tree line. She knew she was losing her grip on reality, yet could not deny the very real terror gripping her heart. The locals had grown openly hostile now, no longer even pretending to be civil. Doors were barred against her, and angry shouts followed her down the street. It seemed word of the madwoman investigating the mill had spread, and she was no longer welcome in their midst. Only Mr. Hawthorne still offered any insight, though even he seemed wary of her now. During one of their meetings, Sarah recounted her disturbing experiences with a tremor in her voice. The old man listened gravely, without interrupting, hands folded as if in prayer. When she finished, he met her gaze with a heavy sigh. "The entity has marked you as its own, child. It will not stop until it claims your soul to feed its insatiable wrath. You must find a way to break its hold before it is too late." "But how?" Sarah cried desperately. "How do I fight something not of this world?" "There may be a way, but it will not be easy, and there is great danger, for you will have to face the true evil lurking in that cursed place. Are you willing to risk all to learn the secrets of that mill? For it holds the key, not only to defeating this entity, but unlocking the mysteries of why this town was doomed from the start." Sarah steeled her nerves. "I have to try. Please tell me what I need to do." Mr. Hawthorne leaned in, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. "Very well. But you must promise to heed my every instruction, exactly as I say. For one small mistake could mean your soul is forfeit. Now listen closely, for there is little time." That night, as Sarah lay awake, gripped by terror, strange lights began flickering in the forest beyond her window. Eerie blue orbs drifted among the trees like wayward fireflies. Coming ever closer to the motel, panic rose in her throat as the lights took on a more purposeful quality, as if searching. Whatever was out there had found her at last. Grabbing her bag, Sarah fled into the night, the unearthly glows in pursuit. She did not look back, running blindly through the pitch-black woods with only the pale flashlight beam to guide her way. Branches tore at her clothes and undergrowth tangled around her ankles, but still she pushed on, the whispers growing louder on the wind. Only one thought echoed in her mind. She had to make it to the safety of Hawthorne's homestead before the entity caught up to claim her for its own. But would she make it in time? The glowing orbs were gaining, taking on a more solid form in the darkness. Just at the edge of sight, Sarah choked back a sob of terror, pushing her exhausted body to its limits as the mill came into view, her only hope of sanctuary against the vengeful spirits on her trail. She had to make it, for if she fell here in the night, none would ever know her fate. The next day, Sarah returned to the mill with Mr. Hawthorne, determined to face whatever evil resided within its walls. As they approached through the dense forest, she felt her resolve wavering under the weight of dread. What if she couldn't overcome her fears? What if the entity was too powerful to defeat? Hawthorne seemed to sense her doubts. "Fear is its greatest weapon, child. Do not let it take hold of your mind and soul. You have the power to stand against it if you but find your courage. Remember why you came, to save this town and put an end to the suffering." Steeling her nerves, Sarah nodded. "You're right, I can do this. Let's go." They entered the mill, Hawthorne lighting the way with an oil lantern. Dusty shafts of sunlight filtered through cracks in the walls, illuminating dancing motes. All was eerily still, until a low moan echoed from the shadows, making Sarah jump. Hawthorne laid a steadying hand on her arm. "Stay calm. It seeks to unnerve you." Deeper within, they came upon a strange stone altar, etched with arcane symbols. Hawthorne examined it closely. This is the heart of its power. Here is where the rituals were performed, feeding its wrath for centuries. You must face the entity and break its hold over this place. Only then can its curse be lifted. Sarah steeled herself as a dark form coalesced before them. Two glowing orbs regarded her hungrily from the featureless face. It let out an otherworldly shriek that shook dust from the rafters. With Hawthorne's encouragement, she stood her ground. "I know the truth of what was done here," she called out. "The desecration, the sins of the past. But no more will the innocent suffer for the deeds of others. I call on you to release this land from your curse. I call on you to release this land." The entity howled in rage, lunging towards her with clawed hands outstretched. Sarah stood firm, even as Hawthorne cried out in fear and betrayal. With her final words, the truth was revealed. He was the last living descendant of the original settlers, carrying on their sins through the ages, and she had fallen prey to his manipulation, walking into a trap. As the entity closed in, a bright light flared within Sarah, banishing the shadows. She saw now this was a test of courage and forgiveness. With compassion in her heart, she said no more. "I break the cycle here." The entity froze, its form dissolving into wisps of mist that was swept away on an unseen wind. The curse was lifted, but Hawthorne's madness remained, and in one final act of vengeance, he lunged at her with a rusted blade. A shot rang out. The police had at last responded to the strange lights seen from town. Hawthorne fell, the truth dying with him. Sarah collapsed in relief. The ordeal at last over. In the aftermath, Sarah slowly recovered from her ordeal as the townsfolk began to heal. With the curse lifted, an air of lightness had returned to the forest. Birdsong filled the trees once more as nature reclaimed the mill, erasing the last traces of its dark past. Though her body mended, Sarah found her mind still troubled by lingering doubts. Had she truly vanquished the entity, or would its wrath one day rise again? Only time would tell if the spirits were at long last put to rest. One evening, as she sat gazing into the fire, a knock came at the door of her motel room. To her surprise, the elderly woman she had seen on her first day was standing there. "Come," she said simply, beckoning Sarah to follow. They walked in silence through the quiet streets as dusk fell, coming to a stop in the town square. There, gathered around a crackling bonfire, were all the residents she had come to know. Welcoming smiles greeted her as the woman spoke. "We wanted to properly thank the brave soul who freed us at long last. For too long our ancestors' sins kept us in darkness and fear. But you brought the light and courage to break that cycle. This town will never forget your selfless act." Overcome, Sarah could only nod in acceptance of their gratitude. As the flames danced merrily before them, she felt a sense of closure to her journey here. Though mysteries remained, for now, there was only peace. In the coming days, she would return to her normal life. But this small town in the woods would always hold a special place in her heart, a reminder of the power one person possesses to overcome even the deepest darkness through compassion and courage. As for whatever spirits may still linger in the surrounding forest, Sarah left confident. Their shadows no longer held sway. A new chapter was beginning for all. Looking out at the gathering dusk, She smiled, knowing that while some whispers from the old mill may persist on the wind, they carried only memories now, no longer a haunting curse, but an enduring legacy of light, triumphing over the shadows of the past.